Live, where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Xtra.
It's Sunday, October 19th. Welcome to ABC-7 Xtra. Good evening. I'm Maria Garcia. This evening on the El Paso Las Cruces CW, perhaps you saw that contentious debate for the New Mexico governor race between incumbent Susana Martinez, the Republican, and her Democratic opponent, Gary King. Martinez paints her opponent, Gary King, as a career politician who wants to rely on federal dollars rather than make business-friendly policies. King says Martinez's tax breaks to big business and budget slashing has been detrimental to New Mexico. Joining us tonight, Walt, Rubel, regional opinion editor for the Las Cruces Sun News, and Keith Whelpley, a radio host with KOBE 1450 AM, where he often talks politics. Be part of the discussion. Call us when the program starts, just now at 496-1775, or when you have questions or comments, email us at ABC7Xtra at KVIA.com, or tweet me at MariaGABC7 or with the hashtag ABC7Xtra. And joining us now, Walter Rubel, regional opinion editor for the Las Cruces Sun News, and Keith Whelpley with 1450 AM. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Harry.
Let's start with education. There was a lot of topics. We have a lot to get to. The debate really touched on standardized testing. Gary King saying we should do away with high-stakes testing, reduce standardized testing, potentially even forfeiting federal dollars. Governor Martinez, though, really focusing on evaluating and assessing teachers. Let's take a listen to what they said.
Indeed, there are some millions of dollars that might come from the federal government, but if we think that that money is doing something that's bad for our children, if we think that it's not good for our school system, then I think that we should go our own way. So I'm willing to do that. I don't think that I've said that I necessarily would do it. What I will do is end high-stakes testing, because we have so much testing in our schools now. I do believe it's bad for our children.
Every professional actually receives an evaluation, and teachers are no different. And what we are evaluating is, are our children learning? And that's why I want to talk to the parents. Are our children learning? And the way we do that is we measure, we assess our children throughout the year.
All right, very different approaches to education. Which answer do you all think appealed more to New Mexicans? Walter, what do you think?
Well, I think this has been a tough one for the governor because she is very much tied to this Florida model that Hannah Scandera, her education secretary, has brought with her and has worked very hard over the last 4 years to try to implement, really against a lot of opposition coming from the legislature. There is a sense, when I talk to teachers, I hear it all the time, that we're spending so much time not only testing, but preparing for the test, that it just doesn't leave time for teaching. The one-on-one time that you really need to work with a student to help each student, sort of grow on their own. It seems like everything has been sort of homogenized, and it's all focused towards that one test, and then you get rid of that, done with that test, and you're focused on the next test. At least that's what I hear.
Now, King says that what's the point of evaluating teachers, assessing them, if they're only teaching to the test? What do you think about that, Keith?
Well, I like King's approach to it, because I don't think anybody in southern New Mexico would be sold on the idea that we need more testing. Even my own daughter, who's a high school junior, I asked her when I heard that, I said, do you feel you've been tested more this year than over past? And she without hesitation said that she has been tested more. On our radio program, we've talked to students who feel testing, so that it's not going to win any votes. I think when you say need more testing, I like King's approach because number one is he really focused on the fact that a lot of these testing companies are coming from out of state, and I think he even used the lining the pockets of out of state companies. So that's an issue that I have. The other thing is, I don't think you can evaluate a teacher fairly by just looking at the grades of a student, because there's so much that the student brings with them to school. There's the home life. A teacher can't be held responsible for what's happening to the student at home. He comes to school, and they can be responsible for that.
Now, Governor Martinez, though, says that a teacher would be evaluated by a 3-year average of how students are doing, so that you couldn't just take one student and see how he's doing and learning. So, do you think that's fair?
I think there's way too much testing as it is. I think there needs to be a different way of assessing teachers. There was so much confusion and anger by parents. Some of them even talked about taking their kids out of school so that they can just get their degree through the state, another state program, just so they avoid these tests, avoid the kinds of ideas where you can do everything right in your curriculum, but lose it all on a state test.
Okay, let's talk about jobs, because it really came up a lot. New Mexico, the state that relies the most on federal dollars, one of the big issues tonight talked about in the debate. Governor Martinez really touted the recently passed jobs package, saying that it created tens of thousands of jobs for New Mexicans. Let's listen to what they say, and then I want to discuss some of those points.
We passed the historic jobs package just last year, and it was praised by Democrats and Republicans, and we did it in a bipartisan way. This allowed for jobs to be created in New Mexico, a total of 32,000 jobs created here in the state of New Mexico. I think we have to diversify our jobs, because to rely on Washington is to rely on failure. My opponent, he wants to rely on Washington and the Washington dollars.
The governor's package is failing because every year, every quarter for the last 4 years, we have lost jobs. And so the 30,000 jobs they've created are at the same time that we've lost more than 40,000 jobs in other sectors. And so giving big tax breaks, giving big tax breaks to big corporations is not working. We have to focus our largesse on our own New Mexico businesses.
Now, King also said that municipalities, counties in New Mexico are making up for those tax breaks by increasing things like their gross receipts tax. Do you agree with that?
Oh yeah, they've all had to do that because the hold harmless is no longer there, and
Las Cruces did it last year.
Las Cruces was one of the first in the state
Right.
to do it.
So it's very tough. But I think the current governor, I think, is doing a lot to try to make the state more appealing to large businesses. But the King splits the hair on business by separating large business from small business, because what's good for a large company doesn't necessarily bode well for a small company. He made the point, I was listening when he made the point that, you know, small businesses are so local that they require adjustments to be made at a local level. But when we take away the hold harmless and the taxes go up that way, it affects the smaller businesses larger than the larger businesses.
But if the environment is conducive to large businesses, wouldn't that bring more jobs to New Mexico? What do you think?
Well, sure it would. The question is, will this tax cut result in that? And this was a very contentious bill when it was passed. It was passed on the final day of the session.
Right.
By law, the session has to end at 12 noon. A lot of people who were there said that this was after 12 noon. The governor's head of DFA, Department of Finance and Administration, gave lawmakers what turned out to be faulty information right before they took that vote. I mean, there were a lot of, it was thrown together at the last second. I mean, there were a lot of good things in it. The corporate tax cut that the governor talked about, it also ended some tax pyramiding that I think is important, and it preserves some breaks for the film and TV industry that's doing very well in the state.
Right.
But as Keith mentioned, to pay for that, instead of paying for that with state revenue, they took that money from counties and cities and gave them the option to raise taxes without going to the voters to do it. And so it really has resulted in a corporate tax break that we all hope will bring in jobs, but it's
in
being
local
paid
tax
for
increases.
by a local tax increase.
And let's talk about the minimum wage. That came up today. The governor said, look, I've been willing to compromise to about $8 an hour. King saying it needs to be at least $10 an hour because at the current rate, less than $8 an hour is just not enough to sustain a family, and so people will end up on government assistance. Governor Martinez, though, says if you raise the minimum wage, it'll create a burden on small and big companies, and that they won't want to come to New Mexico. What are your thoughts on that?
Walt and I disagree on this. I like the idea of smaller increments in raising the minimum wage, and we've talked a lot about it. The community has talked a lot about it. The $10 an hour wage is just way too big a jump from where it's at right now. And the city of Las Cruces had just ad nauseum these debates and talks about where it should be, talked to all the stakeholders. City council came out with 850 over 2 or 3 years, moving it to 850, and then indexing it from that, and that would get it to 1010 eventually. But King and I think others would like to just automatically bring it up to 1010, and I think that would devastate a lot of small businesses in Las Cruces.
You disagree, Walter?
Well, I don't disagree that it would be damaging to a lot of small businesses, but I think that it's the type of thing that we've seen it in the past. Every time they've raised the minimum wage, that we hear these same arguments. And if you are a thriving, strong business, you'll find a way to compensate and to make up for that. If you're not, if you're right on the margin anyway, then I think Keith's right. Some of those will struggle. But on this issue, I do think it's important to note that the governor did veto an increase in the minimum wage that was passed by the legislature, not this year, but the year before that. They raised it by $1. She said at the time that she would have accepted 30 cents. But they couldn't compromise on that, so they went ahead and passed the $1, and she vetoed it.
Okay, we need to take a commercial break. When we come back, we still really have a lot to talk about. We want to talk about the questions they asked each other. Yeah. Governor Martinez implying King is a soft prosecutor, doesn't aggressively go after public corruption. King saying Martinez hires out-of-state people that don't have empathy for New Mexico. So we have a lot more. Plus, licenses for undocumented immigrants and marijuana should be legalized, decriminalized in New Mexico, so we have a lot to talk about. You can call us at 496-1775, email us at ABC7Xtra at KVIA.com, tweet me at Maria G ABC7 or with the hashtag ABC7Xtra. We'll be right back. Welcome back to ABC7 Xtra. We're talking today about the gubernatorial debate for the for the state of New Mexico. We have our panel here. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to make sure we get to the questions that the candidates asked each other. Governor Susana Martinez asked Gary King why he's been, quote, a soft prosecutor as Attorney General, saying his office offers weak plea deals and doesn't aggressively go after public corruption. So let's listen to that exchange.
My office was the first one that actually had a specialized unit to deal with government corruption. And we have removed more officials from state government than anyone else ever has. But we get out there and work every day, and one of the reasons my office has been subject to criticism is because we actually have been out there doing something.
I cannot imagine how you can say that you are an effective Attorney General, and now you want a promotion. I tell the people of New Mexico that the way he has performed is the way he will perform in the future.
What did you think when you saw that exchange? Governor Martinez saying, that he gave a weak plea deal to the Housing Authority, that he didn't go after Bill Richardson the way he should have. What do you all think about that?
Well, Susana Martinez, that's her wheelhouse, man. And locally, Susana Martinez has done so much down here, and I think a lot of the voters like what she did as a DA here, and they know her as an aggressive DA. As a young reporter, I covered her before she was a DA, and she was aggressive, and she worked hard. And
she was tough in the courtroom.
Right. As far as King's record, I really couldn't talk much about whether he's soft or not, but there's not too many who's more aggressive than Susana Martinez in the courtroom.
What are your thoughts about that?
Well, what Gary King says, and I think it's probably true, is that his office has removed more public officials from office than any Attorney General in state history.
Right.
I think that's probably true, but I think that's true because he just happened to inherit the office during this golden era of corruption in New Mexico, where one official after another seemed to get in trouble with the law. And he was successful in prosecuting a handful of those. The ones that he talks about all the time are, the 2 PRC commissioners who both got booted out. And I think the Las Vegas School District, there was somebody on one of their boards. But, the governor is right that when you look at the Rebecca Vigil-Garon and the Housing Authority, and there was one other that I forget.
The Bill Richardson case you mentioned.
The Bill Richardson case, the federal government looked into that for several months and they couldn't come up with a case. And so, yes, there was hanky stuff going on and everybody knew it, but it's one thing for everybody to know it. It's another thing to be able to prove it in a court of law.
Right.
And if the feds couldn't do it, I'm not sure it's fair to blame Gary King for not being able to.
And we don't know if Susanna would have come up with the same determination if she was Attorney General facing the same kinds of questions. She may have said the same thing.
Right. Let's get to the question that King asked of Martinez. He pointed out that the government has appointed out-of-state people to lead these big state agencies, accusing her of overlooking talented New Mexicans in favor of people who he says don't have empathy for New Mexicans. So let's listen to that.
Anyone on the job is what I want is the best qualified individual, even if they don't live here. Because at the end of the day, it's all New Mexicans who benefit from the qualifications that they bring.
Well, I think that New Mexicans do deserve the best, and I think that there are highly qualified New Mexicans, and one of the things I'm committed to, should I be elected governor, is to make sure that we have an education secretary who has real New Mexico classroom experience to head that agency, because sometimes somebody that looks good on paper doesn't do such a good job, and I think that the governor ought to look at some of her cabinet secretaries, because very difficult to claim that they're the best that can be found.
I want to talk about that. You know, she mentioned that even universities have national searches, and so if you're going to have somebody head a big state agency, why not look for the best and the brightest, even if they happen to be out of the state? What do you all think about that?
I think there are really two cabinet secretaries that Gary King's talking about, to be honest. It's Hannah Scandera, the head of education, and Sidney Squire, the head of Health and Human Services. Hannah Scandera came from Florida, and as he said on that piece, she never taught in the classroom. And that's always been a contention from day one. She's been an education administrator. She was a high-level administrator under Jeb Bush in Florida, but she hasn't been a classroom teacher. And Sidney Squire made a comment at one time in an email saying that there was no hunger in New Mexico. And she's the person in charge of alleviating hunger in New Mexico. And so those kinds of things, I do think, make people wonder, if you're importing people, that's fine. We want the best and the brightest, but they need to understand the state that they're serving.
Do you think they understand the state?
No, I don't. And I think Scandera, the governor would be well served to eliminate, if she's elected again, to eliminate her as the education secretary, because she's not done what the governor had hoped she would do, and she's actually been a wedge between the governor's office and many of the teachers in southern New Mexico. So the first thing to do, if she's elected again, is to get rid of her. But as far as the national searches, you need to do national searches. You need to go get the best. She just happened to pick, at least in those two cases, probably not the best for the job.
Let's talk about a topic that I think has evolved a lot in the U.S. really in the last several years, and that's marijuana. I think the public's perception of the legalization and the decriminalization of marijuana has shifted, like a lot of social issues have in the last few years. Slightly varying answers from the candidates when they were asked if marijuana should be legalized or decriminalized in the state of New Mexico. So let's hear that.
I do not favor the decriminalizing of marijuana or the legalization of marijuana. I believe that that is something that only the legislature can do. And of course, doing it with the input of the people of New Mexico, whether or not that should take place. I have seen what can happen when someone is involved with marijuana, especially young teenagers, and how that can take them on to doing other kinds of drugs.
I don't favor the legalization of marijuana in the way that they've done it in Colorado, but I do favor decriminalization to this extent. One of the largest parts of our budget is our corrections budget. And when we take people that have a small amount of marijuana, a personal use amount of marijuana, and put them in prison, it is not the best use of our funds. And we should be spending our time and our interest on violent crimes, on crimes where people should be, that should be put away or put in our prison space.
Okay, so thoughts on this issue?
Well, my thought is that King did he didn't go all the way over to the left on he wants to decriminalize it but not legalize it, And I think that's where most...
And he wants to decriminalize small amounts.
Right.
right.
Yeah, he's not saying let's not prosecute major drug traffickers. He's
Right.
saying if somebody has a personal use, why should we waste state resources in incarcerating them?
But I think the governor's way behind national sentiment and even local and state sentiment on where we are with medical marijuana and in marijuana in general. I think she's way behind.
Well, Gary King brought up something on medical marijuana that I wish they could have followed up on a little bit more. He talked about her trying to weaken that program, and I don't think I know enough about that to I would have liked to have heard more about that, I guess is what
Right.
I'm
He
saying.
did say that she tries to weaken that program in a way that even affects veterans who are
That's
trying
right.
to access medical marijuana. So he says she tries to put sort of undue regulations on that already existing program.
That's right. It's one of the things when Keith and I were talking about it. It frustrated me a little bit about just the format of this debate was that it was very structured and very rigid, and so
Right.
there were times when you really felt like there needed to be a follow-up question, and they moved on to the next topic.
Right.
But in terms of the governor's stance, I mean, she was a prosecutor for 25 years. She comes from that life. That's who she is, and so I don't think anybody should be surprised that that's her position on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to have to take another break. Stay with us. Remember, you can email, call, or tweet us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. We're analyzing the gubernatorial debate for New Mexico this evening. We have a call from Northeast El Paso, and that's Jerome on the line. Hi, Jerome. What's your comment or your question?
By what yardstick do you measure public education system's preparation for giving the labor force what it needs or sending qualified 12th graders into undergraduate school?
Thank you very much. So what yardsticks can you use to measure public education to make sure that our children go to college or enter the workforce?
That's the $64,000 question right there. I mean, because I think most people agree with the governor when she says that it doesn't matter what you do for a living, everybody gets evaluated. I think that's true. But I'm also hearing from teachers who say that we are tying this test, and one of the guys I hear from all the time teaches the higher level calculus and physics classes, and his point is they don't give a test for the stuff I'm teaching. So my evaluation, my potential paycheck, and my job security in the future is tied to test results of other teachers teaching other students.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is a tough question because the students the students who have been on our radio program express a lot of anxiety over these tests because they know that one of their favorite teachers, their performance is being graded, and how they do on this test could affect how that favorite teacher is treated. A lot of anxiety because these high school kids, they're smart. They know what they're being tested for, not for what they know, but for what their teachers have taught them or how well they've taught them.
Really complex issue. Let's move to a really controversial topic. Governor Martinez says she's going to keep fighting to get rid of the law that allows undocumented immigrants to obtain New Mexico driver's license. King says the law is necessary. Both of them agree it's a public safety issue, but for very different reasons. Let's hear what they had to say.
It's not an immigration issue, it is a public safety issue. We have had drug rings in New Mexico and around the country who actually traffic in humans and pay $3,000 to $5,000 to come to New Mexico to commit felonies, to receive documents that are fraudulent.
But law enforcement in New Mexico said that they are much safer, that the public is much safer if everyone who's driving a car has a driver's license that shows their photo, where they are from, and gives some assurance that they have insurance and that they have been trained to drive. And so there's a public safety issue there. What the governor is talking about, people coming in and illegally getting driver's licenses in that way is already a crime in New Mexico, and we're all fighting that crime in New Mexico.
Very controversial issue, and it's something that the legislature has already dealt with, but Governor Martinez vows to keep on fighting to reverse that law. Do you think she can be successful if elected again? Walter.
On this law, no. I mean, I think that she expended a great deal of political capital her first 2 years in office, really put all of the muscle of her office behind this, and just wasn't able to get anywhere with it. It created a wedge between her and the legislature that I think not only, she didn't get anything on that issue, but I think it also damaged the relationship between her and the legislature and made it more difficult for her to get other issues as well. And the other thing, just real quickly, 4 years ago, New Mexico was one of 2 states in the nation that provided driver's license for people here illegally. Now, I think we're 11 or 12 or something like that. Illinois, California, some very large states have joined us since then. And so the argument that she had that this made us a magnet because we were the only ones doing it, that's sort of gone wrong.
No, she contends, though, that she's doing the people's work by continuing to pursue this. She says that a poll showed that 75% of New Mexicans want this law repealed. Do you get that sense, Keith?
No, I don't get it. And this is one of those things that really smells political to me because it comes up a lot when you're talking about purely political people. It is the right really feeling as though giving illegal immigrants a driver's license, you're giving them a privilege, you're giving them something that they shouldn't have because they're not Americans. But I see that, and I can think that way, but then I also think about public safety. King makes a very important point that law enforcement, at least you're putting people into the system if they're forced to have to get a driver's license. What happens after that? Human trafficking, drug trafficking, hopefully they get caught, but I think it's a good point that it's a public safety issue, and if you force these people to get into the system somehow, you're one step ahead of the curve.
Okay, well, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. Very insightful. Thank you for making the drive from Las Cruces here. I think our viewers really appreciate this, especially because sometimes we don't get to do a lot of New Mexico topics. A very deserving one tonight, and really good guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us on ABC-7 Extra. We hope you found this informative and helpful, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.